My goal when I made this recipe was not to make the lowest calorie, highest volume, protein packed pizza out there. There's plenty of other channels that do that kind of thing. Instead, my goal is to find a balance between calories, macros, and most importantly, food that will truly satisfy my cravings. Otherwise, I'm just gonna go off the rails and go on a binge. So I'm really trying to avoid that. And let's face it, tortilla pizzas are great, but they don't really satisfy your pizza cravings, do they? So we're making an 8 or 9-inch pizza, depending how big you stretch it. And this dough is beautiful and stretchy. You'll see why later on. And this is what it looks like with the same calories and macros as a Clif Bar. Is this bad for the camera? Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. If you are new, my name is Mina, culinary school grad, former professional cook. I think you already know what we're doing today. Let's make some pizza. So I will have the ingredients for that recipe on the screen and in the description as always if you're just interested in the recipe, but trust me, you want to watch this one. So we're gonna start off with what's called 00 or double O flour. This is an Italian flour that's gonna give you objectively the best pizza out there. It's a flour that's very, very, very fine. It's ground as fine as it gets. I mean, this stuff is pretty much like baby powder. And when you compare it to all-purpose flour, you can't really tell the difference side by side, but when you feel it with your hand, especially in the packaging, you could really tell how fine this stuff is. And that's one of the main things that's gonna help us get a very stretchy, pliable dough that will still hold its shape after it's baked. And you can use bread flour or AP flour. AP flour will give you a dough that's going to tear a little too easily. Bread flour will give you a dough that's going to be a bit too rubbery in this application. And let me just note that bread flour and AP flour, these terms refer to the gluten content in the flour, whereas the 00 in this flour refers to how finely it's ground, not the gluten content. So obviously weigh out your flour, then add your salt and your yeast. So real quick, I am using instant yeast here, which can be added to the dry ingredients. If you are using dry active yeast, that needs to be activated in warm water before you add it to your ingredients. So just keep that in mind. There are two different kinds that you'll see: dry active yeast and instant yeast. And if you're an expert baker, you may be using cake yeast. Now, I used a thermometer here. You don't really need one here. I just really wanted to make sure the water was where it's supposed to be, but you can just put your finger in there and it has to be very warm, but not too hot that you can't keep your finger in for about 5 to 10 seconds. So mix everything together, and we barely want to mix this together, just barely as it comes together, just like that. And then we're gonna let it sit just like this for about 20 minutes. So this is what's known as the autolus stage. We're pretty much just letting the flour hydrate with all the water, and this is gonna help us to get a stretchier dough. And technically we're supposed to leave the salt and the yeast out of this process, but I decided just to leave it in, and I tried it and it came out just fine because I wanted to make this as easy as possible and still get great results at the end. So cover it, let it sit for about 20 minutes. Let's make the pizza sauce in the meantime. If you're gonna use a jar tomato sauce, feel free to skip this part, but you shouldn't. Just make your own at home. So we're gonna use plain crushed tomatoes, minced garlic. If you don't know how to do that, go check out my knife skill series. It'll teach you how to do that. And I'm also gonna use fresh oregano and marjoram, but you could use whatever you want. This is just how I like my pizza sauce. I like it very plain. So we're gonna go in with extra virgin olive oil. We're using a teaspoon per cup here, 1 teaspoon per cup, and then 1 clove of garlic per cup also. So if you want to follow this exact recipe, it's 1 teaspoon, 1 garlic clove per cup of crushed tomatoes. We're gonna saute it in there. We don't want too much color in there, just a little bit of color. We're gonna hit it with a little bit of salt, and then we're gonna add the oregano and the marjoram. And I like to fry it with the garlic a little bit just to extract some more flavors out of the fresh oregano and marjoram. Then I'm gonna add the crushed tomatoes. And I'm also not gonna cook this sauce for too long. I don't want it to have that cooked taste. I want it to stay pretty fresh. I just wanna get in the flavor of the garlic and the marjoram in there. I added just a splash of water, mainly just to clean the can out, but you don't want too much water in there. Mix it all up and just let it come to a boil. So you'll notice I didn't actually season the tomato sauce itself, no salt at all. and that's for a reason. I wasn't sure how much it was going to reduce until I liked the consistency. So that's right there. I love it. It's not too cooked. So I give it a taste first, and then you think about it. Does it need salt? Does it need sugar? How much of each does it need? This is how you actually season your food. So that's how much salt I thought it needed. That's how much sugar, or the sweetener I should say. I'm using the monk fruit sweetener here. I thought it needed, and I rinsed off the spoon, give it another stir, and then you taste it again. And then you keep doing this process until your food is actually seasoned. Now just set it aside and let it cool down completely. So now it's time to knead the dough. You can do this in a mixer if you want, but I purposely did this by hand to show you that anyone can do this and how easy it is really to do this. So this is a wet dough, and it's gonna stick to your hand once you start to knead it. So have a container of water next to you and just dip your hand in there and wring out all the extra water. We're not trying to introduce any water to the dough, just to lightly coat your hand with water. And what we're really doing here is just folding the dough on top of itself and then giving it a turn. Then you could actually just slam it down into the bowl. So just fold it and slam it, fold it and slam it. You can do all this on the counter if you want also, but I just do it all inside the bowl. It makes for a really easy cleanup afterwards. And we're gonna do this for about 10 minutes. You can dip your hand in the container for, I would say, 3 to 4 times maximum, because again, we're not trying to introduce any water into the dough, just lightly coating your hand with the water. After about 10 minutes of doing this, we're gonna leave it in the bowl with some nonstick spray and just let it rise until it doubles in size. It should take about 1 to 2 hours depending on how hot the environment is. All right, let's take this time to talk a little bit more about the recipe and how it works. So I saw a few of you already mention this in the community post that I made, that you said this is a high hydration dough, and you were exactly right. It is a high hydration dough. This is a 75% hydration dough, which is just a fancy way of saying there's a lot of water in there. Specifically, there's 75% water. Most professional dough recipes out there will come in terms of percentage. It's known as the baker's percentage, and it's actually really easy to understand, and it's going to help you develop recipes, not just memorize them. So as we said before, the water in this dough is 75%. For salt, I used 2%, and for yeast, I used 1%. So what does this mean? These percentages are all relative to the flour, which means that flour is always at 100%. And then everything else is just a percentage based on the flour. So if you take a look at the recipe that we have today, I made it very, very, very easy. I used 100 grams of flour, so we would use 75 grams of water, 2 grams of salt, and 1 gram of yeast. So this way, you really don't have to memorize one recipe. You just have to know these percentages, and you could apply it to whatever amount of flour that you want to use. This is how you develop recipes. Okay, so it's been about an hour and a half. We need a little bit of flour, and I mean a little bit, just a dusting of flour. Again, we're not trying to introduce any more flour or water into the dough, just a dusting of flour on there. We're gonna put the dough on there, and I'm using my bench scraper here. It's great because it has a round side that can just go into the bowl and scrape everything. So now we're gonna weigh out each piece of the dough. It should be about 85 grams for each piece, and you're gonna lose a few grams here and there, so just keep that in mind. It's never gonna be exactly gram for gram. So we're gonna shape these into balls now, and I like to fold over all the sides and then pinch them from the back until you have a rough ball shape, and then I'm gonna brush away all that flour because you actually want the friction here between the dough and the surface that you're rolling on, and you're gonna cup it in your hand and just roll it in and drag it back, roll it in and drag it back, and you're gonna feel that sweet spot where it just starts to roll kind of by itself, and you're gonna get a smooth dough ball. This is an example of a technique that you'll learn here on the channel that you can use in any really kind of baking recipes, because you'll see this being called for in a lot of baking recipes out there. When you need to really just shape the dough into a ball, this is one of the most efficient ways to do it. And as you can see, we barely used any of the flour. It's really all still there. All right, so now that we have the dough balls, we just need to let them proof for 1 hour and they're ready to use. You can also leave them in the fridge and you could use them later on during the week. I like to put them on what's called a sill pad or just a rubber baking sheet. It's like a parchment paper that you can wash and nothing sticks to it. Definitely one of my favorite tools that I have in the kitchen. If you want to cook this dough right away, go ahead and turn the oven on from now because it needs to preheat for a whole hour and you need to put it on at least 500. I have mine at 550, that's the highest it goes, and with the pizza stone already in there. Okay, so it's not really a pizza stone as you can see. It's called a Cori tile and I got it from Home Depot for about $3 or so. And I got this tip from Alton Brown on Good Eats. It's a cheap alternative if you don't have a pizza stone. Just make sure it's untreated and not painted. So while the dough is doing its thing, I'm gonna get the toppings ready, which really is only cheese and basil. That's all I'm doing. And for the cheese, I'm going with full fat fresh mozzarella because it's going to spread a lot and we're not going to use that much. I'm only using 1 ounce of it. So you could use fat-free cheese if you want. You could use part skim, but I would rather use 1 ounce of this than 3 ounces of fat-free cheese. The best way to know when the dough balls are ready is when you poke them and they keep that poke shape. So you can see here, it doesn't bounce back at me. That's when you know it's ready. So since I'm using a pizza stone to cook it, I'm gonna use some semolina flour because it's gonna help me to roll the pizza out onto the stone. If you're not using a pizza stone and you're just gonna use a pan or even a cast iron, you can just use regular flour. You don't need the semolina. I like to start from the outside of the dough and I just flatten it out with my fingers and I work my way towards the inside until it's all pretty even. Then I pick it up and then just let gravity do its thing. So just rotate it while you're holding the edges of it and then it's just gonna stretch. And then the more that you stretch it, you'll realize that this dough is actually pretty stretchy and you could give it a good stretch as you turn it. And just keep doing this. It's pretty fun actually. And then if you want to get fancy with it, you could start to slap it around, maybe throw it, but do this at your own risk because you could drop it. And then you just use your knuckles to stretch it more if you do this. And you'll see here the dough is very stretchy. You could just stretch it really thin. So at this stage, if you have a pan or a cast iron or anything like that that you're gonna bake the pizza in, go ahead and put the dough inside. But since I'm using a stone, I'm gonna put it on my makeshift pizza paddle because it's not really a paddle, it's just an old cutting board that I have. And I stretch the dough out to about 8 to 9 inches. Again, you can stretch it more than this, as I mentioned before, but it's up to you to how thin you really want it. This part is pretty self-explanatory, but a little tip if you want to sauce evenly all around, just start with a big pile of sauce in the middle of the pizza and then make concentric circles out all the way up to the crust and just leave like 1/2 inch to 1 inch for the crust. Then we're gonna tear up the cheese into pretty small pieces because again, full fat cheese will spread and it may not seem like a lot now, but it will spread in the oven. And if you're using a pizza pan or a cast iron, you're pretty much done at this point. Just pop it in the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes until it's done. This next part will be for the pizza stone people. About 10 minutes before you cook your pizza, you really want to get your stone hot. So put your broil on high and that's going to get your stone as hot as you possibly could. We're looking for, 900 degrees is ideal. Obviously that's not achievable in the home oven. The hottest I was able to get mine was about 650. I think the closest I really got was 675. That was the absolute highest. I really think the highest you're gonna get with a home oven is around 700 degrees. So right before you pop the pizza in, you actually want to switch the oven back to bake on 550 or whatever the highest temperature is. The key to the pizza slide is confidence. You can't second guess yourself. You just have to go for it. So we're gonna cook it for 5 minutes on bake, and then the last 2 minutes we're going to broil it on high. I know it's kind of a complicated way to cook it, but this is the best way to cook it. And if you wanna know where I got all these methods from, it's from one of my favorite books of all time. It's called Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast. I've been using it for years, and if you actually scroll down all the way down on my Instagram, you'll see one of the very posts that I ever post on there was a loaf of bread that I baked from that book. Then when it comes out, it's gonna get the fresh basil and just 2 grams of Pecorino Romano. I just have to try it right now. Yeah, we got the color on the crust because we use the stone. Well, if you use a stone, look at that. We have nice bubbles in here, nice and airy. It has that tear that you want from a pizza crust. There's nothing to say. It's real pizza, but just made in a smarter way. That's it. And we know all the ingredients that went in here. There's no strange chemicals, no weird ingredients of any sort. I mean, we made the dough from scratch with 4 ingredients. We made the dough with 4 ingredients. That's it. Cheese, sauce, very basic, basil. That's it. If you want to up the protein on this, you can always add ground chicken, ground turkey, any kind of meat on top before it goes into the oven. You could prep this dough like we talked about, just leave it in the fridge, and any day of the week that you want pizza, get a dough ball out, roll it, put your toppings on, put it in the oven. Done. I have to say, add the Parmesan cheese. Takes it to another level. Definitely go try this recipe out. Definitely, definitely, definitely. You can even use this dough to make a calzone. Put whatever toppings that you want. Don't forget to tag me on Instagram if you make this. I'll make sure to repost everybody who tags me, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.